The wizarding world, well, it was built on a massive lie. And no, I'm not talking about Voldemort's lies or even the Ministry's propaganda. I mean a deeper, much older falsehood that was just hiding in plain sight. Today, we're exploring a society entirely powered by invisible slaves. People who literally smiled while polishing the silver and punished themselves just for speaking out. I want you to picture, if you will, a lush, magical world, gorgeous and enchanting on the surface, honestly kind of like a breathtaking Ghibli film, but underneath, entirely reliant on forced servitude. So welcome to our explainer. This is Unshackled Magic, a full breakdown of what if Dobby led a house elf rebellion against the Ministry. All right, let's jump right into this alternate history. Because, everything pivots on just one single fateful moment. What if the knife missed? We all know the tragic story, right? Dobby sacrifices himself to save Harry and the gang at Malfoy Manor. But I want you to imagine a totally different timeline for a second. Imagine that silver blade thrown by Bellatrix Lestrange, missing M by just a few inches. Dobby survives. He apparates safely to Shell Cottage, totally breathless, but alive. Now, as the dust of the Second Wizarding War finally settles and Voldemort is defeated, Dobby looks around. He sees the victory celebrations, the relief, the tears, but then he also sees the thousands of house elves who are still bound to their masters. It hits him. Post-war freedom? It's still a complete illusion for so many. In this timeline, he isn't just a tragic symbol of sacrifice anymore. No, he becomes the living spark of a full-blown revolution. And there is just this massive, stark contrast in how things are perceived. I mean, wizarding society basically views house elves as property. They're magical tools and, let's be honest, occasionally just comic relief. Wizards mostly remember Dobby for, ironing his own hands, wearing those mismatched socks, and speaking in those quirky, broken sentences. But underneath all that, you're looking at one of the absolute bravest beings in the entire magical world. Dobby understood something genuinely terrifying. He saw that the system wasn't just like a little flawed, it was fundamentally broken. While wizards were busy laughing at elf eccentricities, Dobby was seeing the invisible chains. He realized that as long as elves were magically bound, true freedom in the magical world, it literally did not exist. So right after the Battle of Hogwarts, the wizarding world enters this super fragile recovery period. And honestly, it's a time of deep, deep hypocrisy. The Ministry is incredibly weak, public trust is absolutely shattered, and all these families are grieving. But buried right beneath those joyous victory celebrations is this incredibly uncomfortable truth that literally nobody wants to talk about. Think about it. The exact same society that just fought a brutal, bloody war against blood purity and oppression is still fully 100% tolerating magical slavery. Dobby, who has been totally transformed by his own freedom, wearing what he wants, working for actual wages, choosing kindness over just blind obedience, he sees this hypocrisy instantly. Because once you experience true freedom, well, it becomes psychologically impossible to just ignore others who are still living in chains. Now, a revolution like this, it wouldn't start with wands blazing in the streets. Not at all. It starts entirely in the shadows. Picture this. First, just quiet, hushed conversations down in the warm, steam-filled kitchens of Hogwarts. A whisper over here, a knowing look over there. Next, you get these secret meetings happening in the damp cellars of elite pureblood homes late at night. And finally, the stories start passing like wildfire between magical households. Stories about an elf who actually escaped servitude and lived happily without any punishment. The pacing of the movement just rapidly accelerates. It's highly tactical, it's entirely nonviolent at first, but it spreads with this quiet, undeniable momentum. And the oblivious wizarding masters, they don't even notice a thing until it is literally right at their doorstep. And then, bam, the domino effect, the silent strike. Just imagine thousands of house elves suddenly realizing their collective power and simply refusing to serve. The results would be immediate and honestly devastating for the wizards. Meals just stop appearing overnight. Elite purebloods who have been entirely dependent on elf labor for literally centuries are suddenly forced to figure out how to boil their own water. Dust gathers, fires die out in the grates. But here is the critical part. Ancient magical estates lose the creatures that are actively maintaining their centuries-old enchantments. Wards just drop. Security completely fails. These pureblood families who once laughed at the very idea of elf rights are thrown into instant, blinding panic. Because they aren't facing an army, they're facing the sudden, deafening absence of the labor that built their entire world. So this is the really crucial point to understand. Why are the elves so incredibly dangerous? It all comes down to house elf magic. Their magic operates under completely different rules than normal wand magic. Look, wizards have spent centuries conditioning elves to underestimate themselves. But in doing so, wizards fatally underestimated the elves right back.
I mean, Dobby can apparate directly inside Hogwarts when even the greatest human wizards literally cannot do that. Creatures survive the poison in Voldemort's cave. Those are conditions that would absolutely kill a human. Elves can bypass elite wizard security simply because wizard wards were never designed to stop them in the first place. It is a brilliant tactical advantage. The Masters literally invited their own biggest blind spots right into their homes.
And honestly, this is exactly why Dobby would succeed where others totally failed. Like, consider Hermione's Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, SPEW. Hermione definitely had the best intentions, bless her. But elves genuinely feared her movement. Why? Because she fundamentally misunderstood their culture. She wanted to basically force freedom onto them, and they were utterly terrified of it. Dobby, on the other hand, he is entirely different. He bridges both the human and the elf world perfectly. He understands wizard politics from all his time with the Malfoys, but he also deeply, intuitively understands elf psychology. And, most importantly, the other elves actually trust him. He isn't some human dictating what's best for them from the top down. He's a brother, showing them a different path.
Now, if house elves successfully demand rights, the Ministry faces its absolute worst nightmare. The entire magical hierarchy is suddenly at risk of total collapse. Just think about the current status of these groups for a second. Goblins? They're treated as second-class citizens and already deeply distrust the Ministry. Centaurs have these long-standing grievances and are kept territorially isolated. Werewolves have been pushed to the absolute very edges of society. The Ministry's entire power structure totally relies on keeping this rigid, oppressive hierarchy in place. Dobby's rebellion threatens to expose the whole shebang. If the elves, who are viewed as the absolute lowest of the low in the wizard's eyes, if they can break their chains, the Ministry faces the terrifying prospect of literally every other marginalized group following suit.
Let's look at the stark difference between Voldemort and Dobby for a minute. I know. Comparing them sounds totally absurd at first, right? But think about it systemically. Voldemort united people against him because he was this clear, unmistakable, cartoonish evil who ruled entirely through fear. Dobby, on the other hand, he unites people around justice, and he leads with unquestionable morality. And that right there makes Dobby a far more formidable threat to the establishment than Voldemort ever was. The Ministry could always rally Aurors to go fight dark magic, but how on earth do they fight a moral awakening? How do they fight a leader whose only weapon is the undeniable truth that their entire society is built on cruelty? Simple answer, they can't. Which brings us to a very, very uncomfortable question for the characters we all know and love. Would the heroes actually support complete elf independence? I want you to envision Harry Potter right now, with his signature lightning-shaped scar and his thin, round-framed glasses, looking out over this newly peaceful world. Harry loved Dobby, for sure. He mourned him deeply. But Harry also inherited Creature. He actively benefited from the exact same system he morally opposed. Dobby's rebellion would absolutely force characters like Harry, Ron, and the rest of the wizarding world's greatest heroes to confront their own complicity. Would they actually agree to pay fair wages? Would they willingly give up their inherited servants? It's an incredibly tough mirror to look into, even for the bravest of Gryffindors.
Ultimately, the Ministry would probably lose this war, and it wouldn't even be on a battlefield. They would lose it culturally. Just imagine public trials exposing generations of abuse by highly respected, wealthy wizarding families. All their dirty little secrets dragged right out into the light. Imagine a whole new generation of young witches and wizards, raised in the aftermath of Voldemort's defeat, looking at their parents and asking, wait, why does slavery still exist here? Imagine Hogwarts students creating a brand new Dumbledore's army, but this time siding explicitly with the house elves. Morally speaking, the older, traditionalist wizards would have absolutely no defense against the righteous anger of their own youth suddenly waking up to the truth.
But look, we have to acknowledge a pretty heartbreaking reality here. Every revolution has a cost. The magical world would inevitably plunge straight into civil conflict. Pureblood extremists, getting desperate to hold on to their high status, would absolutely retaliate violently against striking elves. Dark wizards, who are ever opportunistic, would definitely exploit all the political chaos for their own gain. And perhaps the saddest part of all, traditionalist elves, who would be totally terrified of abandoning centuries of deeply ingrained magical conditioning, might actually violently resist the change themselves, actively opposing Dobby's followers. It wouldn't be a clean, easy victory. Actually, scratch that. Dismantling institutions that are centuries old is always an incredibly messy, painful process. Through all of this chaos, Dobby himself would have to undergo a really profound transformation. The shy, eccentric little elf who was obsessed with Harry Potter would absolutely have to evolve. Because, as we know, leadership always changes people. To survive and actually guide his people, Dobby would become this complex political strategist. He'd become a true symbol of justice, deeply respected by his allies and genuinely feared by the Ministry. It would be such an inspiring yet kind of poignant evolution, because at his core, Dobby never actually wanted power, never. He only ever wanted dignity. And honestly, that is exactly what makes him such a compelling revolutionary. He fights not to conquer anyone, but just to be recognized as an equal.
I really want to let this truth sink in for a second. Defeating one villain is easy compared to changing an entire society. When Harry defeated Voldemort, sure, he struck down a tyrant, but the systemic rot, the deep prejudice, the whole magical hierarchy, all of that remained fully 100% intact. Dismantling a deeply rooted system of oppression takes way more than just a well-aimed disarming charm. It takes ordinary, everyday courage, persistent refusal, and the actual willingness to tear down the very foundations of the world you live in just to build something truly fair. Dobby's survival wouldn't have just been a nice emotional relief for the audience, it could have fundamentally rewritten the wizarding world's entire destiny.
Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought. As we wrap up this explainer, looking back at all these hidden systems of control woven throughout the magical world, we really have to wonder. Dobby had the courage to see the invisible chains and the absolute heart to break them. But look at all the brilliant, powerful, supposedly good wizards throughout history who simply walked past those kitchens without even a second glance. Maybe the real question isn't whether a house elf like Dobby could lead a rebellion against the Ministry. Maybe it's why nobody else ever tried first. Thank you so much for joining me for this breakdown. Keep questioning the systems around you, and as always, keep learning.